everyone, welcome back to Great Northwest Weaponry. This is Thomas, and today we are doing the demo of what I consider the absolute crown jewel of my rifle collection at this point, the SVT-40. It's one that, again, as I've said, anytime it's come up, I have wanted one of these so bad for so long. In my opinion, and not just my opinion, but I know that there are people who would argue otherwise, this is what I would consider to be the best semi-automatic rifle of World War II. And we'll get into that a bit more as we go into talking about the history and development of this rifle. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and hop over to the gun room. I'm going to do everything I can to not just gush about how much I love this rifle, but in my opinion, this is probably the single coolest gun that I have purchased from my friends at the Warfront. And I've got a lot of cool guns from them, including my 1911, the Browning high power that we'll be taking a look at. And speaking of that, we did do a poll between the three most recent acquisitions in the collection to see which one you guys wanted to see first. And overwhelmingly, you voted for the SVT-40. Out of, I want to say it was like 334 votes that the total poll got. The SVT-40 was somewhere between 36 and 37%, where the M1 carbine and the Browning high power, which is right over here, both pulled in 22%. So again, overwhelmingly, you guys voted to see the SVT-40. Over half of a three-way poll went to this one. And again, I'm so excited about this gun. How they came to be is a bit of a mess, actually. So in the early 1930s, like most countries around the world before the outset of World War II, the Soviet Union was looking to adopt a new firearm, and they appointed a pair of Russian gun designers, Sergei Semenov and Fyodor Tokarev, to create semi-automatic rifles to replace the Mosin Nagant, what would have then been the 9130. And it kind of happened, kind of not really. We'll get into that a lot, actually. But we're going to start off with talking about the prototypes that led to this. So, Semenov created a rifle called the AVS-36, and Tokarev created the SVT-38. Both of these would see service through the Winter War with Finland of 1939 to 1940, and both of them would ultimately be ditched for some pretty similar reasons. Both of them, it was entirely a matter of they were shown to be unreliable and just needed some massive improvements. And the gun that they were designing their rifles based on, by the way, is the Mexican Mondragon, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but the Mexican Mondragon model 1908 semi-automatic rifle from before the First World War. So semi-autos were, again, very much a thing that already existed. There just weren't really any good ones until the M1 Garand, of which is definitely the one that people argue whether the SVT-40 or the M1 Garand is best. You don't really hear an awful lot of people throwing the Gewehr 43 into the mix because the Gewehr 43 had problems. So did the Gewehr 41. Both were made under rushed production in the middle of the war, whereas the SVT-40 was actually made at a time when Russia was more or less at peace. So carrying on with the SVT, and SVT, by the way, is an acronym that in Russian means Tokarev's auto-loading rifle. I'm not going to attempt to say the Russian words for it. I'll type it down here, but it's definitely not something that my very non-Slavic tongue cannot pronounce. So April 1940, the production for the 1938 model, the SVT-38, is officially nixed. It is terminated. The biggest problems that they had with it, it was too heavy, it was difficult to operate, it jammed a lot, the gas system tended to foul up a lot, and a weird one, in combat, they were having consistent issues with the magazine just falling out of the rifle. 1941 is when the AVS-36 would be canceled, but by then we already had the SVT-40. So with what they learned from the Winter War, improvements were made on the Tokarev design from the 38 to what you see before us here, the SVT-40. About 150,000 of the SVT-38s were made. The biggest differences you'll notice, the fore end looks a little different, and the cleaning rod is actually mounted along the side of the gun rather than under the barrel. That's a couple things that just for the most quickly noticeable differences. They also streamlined production. A number of parts that were milled became stamped because they could be, and that just made it quicker. It was still expensive to produce, and that actually led to kind of the downfall of the SVT-40. They were made to be lighter. There were lightning cuts made in the stock. Everything was intended to be lighter, easier to produce, and more reliable. And what they created was an incredibly reliable gun, and reliable to the point that they still pop up to this day in conflicts around the world, basically wherever the Soviets left weapons, of which is like most of the Middle East and any Eastern European nation, basically. So SVT-40s pop up all over the place, and a lot of them were made, a total of somewhere between 1.5 and 1.6 million from different estimates that I've seen online. And these, from what I can tell, are very much estimates. We'll get into that a bit because there was, well, blitzkriegs happened, and a lot of these were lost or wound up in other people's hands, and factories were moved. It got very complicated. So June 1940, the SVT-40 starts rolling off the line, and just in the first few months, they made around, from what I've seen, 70,000 just from June to December. And then it gets even more intense from there. The initial manufacturer was Tula, and if I'm not mistaken, mine is a Tula. I don't know the exact meaning of a number of the markings on this, and when we go to the tabletop, I'll definitely point out some stuff, and any of you who are savants when it comes to Russian military stamps, definitely, you know, let me know what you know, if you happen to know anything interesting regarding that. We're going mostly history overview here. Russian markings, to me, it is some of the more archaic stuff out there. It's not like Japanese markings where it's like, this literally means this. It's just like, okay, there's a triangle and a star and a crescent moon, and I don't know what that series of markings means. Not exact interpretations there, though. The triangle does typically indicate if a gun was made at the Ivsesk arsenal. I have no idea how to say that word. Or a star typically would indicate the Tula arsenal, and this does have a number of stars on different parts of the gun. So that's what leads me to believe it's a Tula. It is, however, a 1943 production, so again, things get complicated there, because in 1941, Operation Barbarossa kicks off. Germany breaks their pact with Russia and invades. Very quickly, Stalin orders that all of the factories that the Wehrmacht is closing in on be moved east of the Ural Mountains as far as possible away from the German advance. This halted production of the SVT-40, and I will also note, in 1941, up to the point of the German invasion, about 1 million of the 1.5 or so million SVT-40s that were ever made were made in 1941. Initially, it was just Tula, then Izhevsk jumped on board, and a number of other factories, and they started pumping them out really quickly. The intention was to fully replace the Mosin Nagant 9130. I've actually seen stated that certain field manuals for different Russian divisions mandated that 1 in 3 soldiers have an SVT-40. Now, that did not in fact come to be. The Russians, especially early in the war, and you know, it's debatable if this really got fixed, but especially early in the war, they were ill-equipped, ill-prepared. The Germans steamrolled Russia for the first year of their campaign, but then winter set in, and then it turned from a, we're going to take Moscow by Christmas, to, oh no, we've got to deal with this situation in Stalingrad, and it never got dealt with, right up to the point that the Russians rolled the Germans all the way back to their own country. But during that initial mass invasion, the first stages of Operation Barbarossa, I've seen it stated that if not tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of SVT-40s wound up in German in German hands. Or Finnish hands. That is an interesting little part of Operation Barbarossa. People think of it as just purely the German invasion. They had Romanian and Finnish allies with them. The Finns in World War II I've always been fascinated with. They never really bought into Nazi ideology. They simply wanted to kick the crap out of their bully, of which was the Soviet Union. And as soon as the Germans tried to force their ideals upon them, they then turned against the Germans. It was very much the Finns stuck out for Finland, and as such you will see a lot of SVT-40s with Finnish markings on them, the famous Finnish SA stamp being chief among them. Also beware that people did fake those stamps and do fake those stamps. I actually, much to my dismay, stumbled across just on eBay someone selling metal stamps that you could knock a stamp into a gun, and people do it all the time. I've got at least one gun that has a fake stamp on it for certain. My M95 Steyr, fake Waffenamp. They never Waffenamped the stocks on Steyr M95s, but you see it often because collectors in the 60s and 70s thought it'd be cool. And supposedly there are still people doing it to this day. But anyway, back to the SVT-40. So after the factories were moved, production started to wind down, actually, for the SVT-40, all the way to the point that in 1945, before the war was over, in January of 1945, it was officially ordered that production of the SVT-40 cease. The last to stop was Tula. Tula was the first and last producer of the SVT-40. I want to say it was in 1942 that Izhevsk, or however in the world you say that particular manufacturer's name, they themselves were given the order to stop and to switch production fully to the Mosin-Nagant. The reason that they went back to the Mosin-Nagant was they were mass conscripting people and having very little time to train them, and it was deemed that the SVT-40 was the hardest gun for those new to the military life to adapt to. Was the SVT-40. It was easier to train them on the PPSH or on the 9130 Mosin-Nagant. So what wound up happening was SVT-40s would primarily go into the hands of NCOs and sharpshooters, of which is a whole nother weird thing where there was some 57,000 of SVT-40s that were made to be sniper rifles, but then it was decided that, like, well, it's not really accurate enough to be a sniper rifle, and it's better to just throw this nice new PU scope on a Mosin-Nagant than it is to throw it on an SVT-40. But the SVT-40, its kind of shining qualities are its reliable and ease of cleaning and just generally non-problematic. The only real issue that you'll hear about is some of the earlier ones had problems where right at the wrist, the stock would just break from the recoil. This seems to be something that they remedied as production went on. And every SVT-40 that you're going to see now is going to be mismatched, repeated reblues, even this like almost lacquered finish on them, which has been on almost every single one of them that I've seen. This is all stuff that was done as their life was extended and they stayed in service year after year after year. Even though production ended in 45, they never really stopped using them. And as I said, you can still see clips of these popping up in modern war. So it's a fascinating rifle. They have a long life. They've been going strong for over 80 years. And with that, I think this is actually a good spot to transition to the tabletop view, and we'll take a look at how to take apart the gas system and the bolt system, and also a closer peek at this original bayonet that I have here. Takedown for this isn't especially complicated, but it is kind of hard to do, actually. So first off, let's go ahead and remove the magazine. You got to fold out that little lever there, and then push in and rock forward. Now, real quick look at the magazine. You see that this is absolutely covered in stamps, electro-pencil. That's because these were force matched to whatever gun they needed to be attached to. The 1976 electro-penciled on this there. Could be the year that it was force matched to this rifle. Hard to say for sure. I'm gonna go ahead and set that aside and fold that down and out of our way. We'll be putting the mag back in when we go to take a look at the gas system itself. But up next, we'll quick look here. You can see stamped right on the top there, 1943, and then there's a poorly struck, kind of right at the tip of the shadow of my finger there, the star that I'd mentioned that is often indicative of it being a Tula. You can also see a large version of that on the stock right here. So that is what makes me believe this is a Tula. Now, this part is annoying. So what we're gonna do is pull this piece right here forward, but there is a spring inside and it is attached right here, and we need that to come off. Getting that back on is going to be a huge pain, and we need to hold it there to put that back on. But for the time being, let's go ahead and fish this out of the gun. I want to make sure that our bolt is all the way forward, because there we go. Just need to get it to a point that it will come free. And there's a bit of a kink in that spring. I might try and kind of work that out, but it shouldn't be too big of a deal. When it's all piled up in there, it works just fine. Now, there is a sweet spot right in here where there's a track in this that will allow you to rotate up and out. And it is right there. From there, you're gonna pull forward, and then your whole bolt block comes out. The bolt block is, for our purposes, just two pieces. So this interior piece lifts up, and then you can slide forward and it comes out. It is only held in by this last little bit is, as you can see, there's a milled surface in there. So putting it back in, just go to the edge of that milled surface and then slide forward until it falls into that track. Getting it back inside the rifle, we want to go the lip in on the far side and then slide back until it falls into place right there. Now it can slide forward and be just generally out of our way. I want to make sure that, yeah, that's matched up correctly. Okay, now we got to feed the spring back in. And this part is one of the first parts where you start to realize that putting an SVT-40 back together is a pain. Okay, that is in. Now this is the part that I hate. We're going to push this as far forward as we can and then try and fish it into this. I'm losing it. There we go. There we go. You've got to push all the way in and lift up as you're setting this back down in the track. Again, that is the most difficult part of this reassembly to me. And you can see it's under a ton of pressure, enough to dent my fingers wherever I try to hold it in. Now, we can go ahead, reinsert our magazine. Now we're going to take a look at the front end and how this all comes apart. So first thing we're going to do is remove our cleaning rod. There's a button right here. You're gonna push that in and pull out. You can see that ring is what is retained there, and then it just slides the rest of the way out. Set that aside now. Up next, the front barrel band. There's this lever here. Go ahead and push that in, slide the barrel band off, and we gotta kind of fish it over the bayonet lug and the front sight here. Now, before we go any farther, and speaking of the bayonet, I had mentioned that we were going to take a look at this one a little closer before we move on. So you can see this was actually kind of rusted when I got it, and there's that star stamp again. So once again, likely made at the Tula Arsenal, and most of these were. Most of everything involving the Tokarev, the SVT-40 rifle, was made at the Tula Arsenal. But there you go, original bayonet, not easy to find. Definitely an interesting one. I've never seen one where your attachment lever is so pronounced. outside of this example. But let's go ahead and set that back aside because we don't need it going forward, but we'll be attaching that for when we go shooting here in a bit. Continuing with digging into the gas system here. So the next thing that we need to do is take off this top piece of your kind of vented metal shroud. So it just lifts up and then pulls back, and you can see that edge is held in by this this kind of folded over stamp piece on the bottom. Now from there, we can go ahead and take off top handguard, set that aside, and now the gas line is fully exposed. And what I'm showing you guys here also, this can be used to adjust the gas system itself. So I've got it set at 1.3, and that is where it seems to function best for this. It can be set to 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.5, and 1.7. 1.3 is where it cycles with the ammo that I'm using. You'll have to test depending on the ammo that you're using, but definitely try not to overpressure. Definitely, you know, try and do your research. This part I almost forgot. This is easiest done with the bolt open. It can be done with the bolt closed. It's easier with the bolt open because that way you're not, you know, fighting the spring in your bolt. We're gonna pull back on this piece while holding this piece stationary, and then this all comes out. This back bit is actually 3 pieces in and of itself, but we're gonna keep them together. Set that aside. Now, moving up to the very nose of the gun. This piece comes off, and then we have a crescent wrench. Now, to adjust the gas normally, you would need a special tool. They had their own tool for this, but with a simple crescent wrench, you can do it. You just don't want to use the crescent wrench or I've seen people say, like, you just use vice grips, it works. Yeah, it works, but you're gonna tear the edges off of this. This is a pentagonal piece here, 5 sides. You're gonna shred it if you don't use the proper tool. But this part is only 4 sides, so we can just pop that free, and then should thread off by hand from there. And it's threaded in there quite a ways, so this may take a moment. There we go. Now this piece, you can just kind of punch that out of there, and there you can see what I was saying there. So there's your 1.7 to 1.1, and you can see between the 1.7, of which is this larger hole, and the 1.1, there is actually noticeable size difference. So going down the depending on what number you've got here, your hole doesn't directly line up with the one that's on here. So that's actually your smallest hole. That's your 1.1, and then that's your biggest hole is your 1.7. But looking at it, that hole is right between 1.3 and 1.2. So that is what allows more or less gas to cycle through. I'm gonna go ahead and stick that back in there. Can't really push it through by hand, but when we start to thread this in, it'll push it out. Then I'll make sure that it's adjusted to where it needs to be. And it does tend to walk a little bit when you're tightening it, so you want to be careful. So yeah, right now there it's at 1.2, 1.3. We want that to stay. You kind of got to hold on to it as you tighten this back piece. Again, you want it to be pretty firm or it will walk when you're shooting it, and you don't want it to do that. Put this back in. Thread this through here, and then we need it to go into that side. Handguard. Something's really tight there. Oh, there we go. I tried to go in too early. These tracks need to go into both sides here, so just kind of guide that on. Take our barrel band. Once you get to here, you got to press that in. There we go. Cleaning rod. and just push it all the way in until it clicks. And there we go. That is all she wrote. Let's go ahead and take this thing back out to the range and put a full 10 through it this time. I'm gonna go ahead and attach the bayonet for this last segment here. And SVT-40 bayonets, expensive, not particularly easy to find. Now for loading, just rack it back and it locks. This takes 10 rounds of 7.62x54mmR. It is fed with the same clips as the Mosin Nagant. Simply going to insert and then push all the way through. The last one kind of hopped out there. And then do so a second time, as again, 10 rounds. The clips only hold 5. Oh, that one was trying to get stuck there. Okay. All right. Now, I've started the video with just 5. I'm gonna end with a full 10 here. And then you can just pull back a little bit and then let it fall forward. And your safety is this strange little paddle right there that flips forward and simply stops the trigger from engaging. Nothing gonna happen with that there. You can push it back with your pointer finger. Now, here we go. I am so happy with this thing, and it does seem, at least for mine, the correct gas setting for PPU 182 grain FMJ is 1.3, and the gas can be adjusted at the nose there, as we showed back in the tabletop segment. But there you go. That's all she wrote. SVT-40, my pride and joy, gun that I've been trying to get my hands on an example of for years, and finally happened. Definitely be seeing this pop up some more in future videos, including, you know, shorts, maybe some day at the range videos, maybe a versus video at some point, depending on what kind of guns we can get our hands on going forward. I definitely have a few that I'm looking at right now. I have something on layaway that would be an interesting one to put head to head with this, so look out for future first shots shorts, and you'll see anything that's new coming in on the channel. But we got to lay away on something exciting. So anyway, thank you all for watching. It's been Thomas, the Great Northwest Weaponry, and I will see you next time.